The morning drive, proving once again that this is the best 3 hours of your life, and that includes your wedding day. After we clear out of here, Glenn Beck, Rush Limbaugh, Chris Beckham, Sean Hannity, Neil Bortz, a veritable murderer's row of news talk all across South Georgia and North Florida. But we are thrilled beyond belief that Mark Steyn, and you may know him best as, you don't know everything this guy does, but if you listen to Rush Limbaugh on the stage from noon to 3, you hear him as like the number one pinch hitter for Rush. He comes in, he talks, and we've got him on the horn right now. Good morning, Mark Steyn.
Hey, good to be with you, Frank.
Mark, it's great to have you. I appreciate taking the time. I know you're a busy guy, and we always hear you on the radio, but I think what we want to talk about right now is you've got this dynamite book coming out called After America, Get Ready for Armageddon. How dare you put that in the title of a book, my friend?
Well, because you write a big, scary, doom-mongering book because you don't want it to happen. I mean, it's not in my interest for total societal collapse to occur, because it'll make it much more difficult to cash my royalty check when we're reduced to a subsistence barter economy. So I'm not in favor of it happening. I want to stop it happening, but I think we've got only a very short time to do it, or by the middle of this decade, we will be in a post-American world, and believe me, that is not something anyone's going to enjoy.
Let me start with the biggest softball question of the day, and I'm going to take this back to the halcyonic good time days of Barack Obama's administration, where I say, is America too big to fail? He used this with a lot of companies. What about the country? Are we too big to fail, or are we susceptible to falling apart?
No, I think when you're this size, you're going to fail on a whole different level. I mean, basically, when Iceland and Portugal, those kind of countries, go belly up, unless you're Icelandic or Portuguese, it's not that big a deal. It doesn't affect anybody else. And if you are Icelandic and you collapse, a couple of years go by, you're out there on the periphery of the map, and life goes on. When America decides to go over the cliff, it lands with a much bigger thud than Iceland or Portugal. So the scale of catastrophe here is a $15 trillion catastrophe, and 10 times that in unfunded liabilities. No one's using the T word in Greece. No one's using the T word in Portugal. That's unique to Washington. And the scale of the disaster will be that much more spectacular.
Well, that's the problem I have is I didn't sign up to be in a third world banana republic in a country I can't find on a map. Instead, I'm looking at the USA going, what's wrong and how do we fix it? So let's start with the first question. What's wrong, or how did we get here, or is anyone doing anything about the core problems we're really facing?
Well, we have a deformed business model that would not pass muster anywhere else. I mean, the United States government spends $500 million every hour, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that it doesn't have, $500 million. So we then have fellas during these debt negotiations, they spend a month, and then they all stand on the steps of the Capitol proudly announcing they've got a plan to save $7 billion in fiscal year 2012. So they've spent a month negotiating $7 billion of savings, which is what the United States borrows back every 30 hours. It's a complete waste of time, that. By about 2015, just the interest payments on the debt will be funding the entire cost of the Chinese military. Now, what that means is that your listeners, Georgia taxpayers, are funding the People's Liberation Army of China. That is insane. When the commies take Taiwan, small businesses in Georgia, suburban taxpayers in Atlanta will have paid for it. That's insane.
Now, when we're looking at this, and if you're just now tuned in, Mark Steyn, we're talking about his book, After America, Get Ready for Armageddon. Mark, as we're looking at all these things that are bad, is there anyone on any side of the aisle making any sense about actually tackling the fundamental problem that we face?
Well, I was delighted to find that Michelle Bachmann was on the stump in Iowa and quoting me in Indianola and Waterloo and even on Meet the Press to the consternation of the host. And I would love it if she were not the last presidential candidate. I'm not necessarily to quote my book. I mean, I'm grateful for the plugs. But what I like about that is it shows she understands the urgency. This is not something to leave to a congressional super committee with John Kerry and Patty Murray sitting around proposing plans for mid-century. It's the urgency, and I hope she's not the last presidential candidate to understand. I mean, in a way, it's urgent for them too, because on present course, the IMF says China will become the world's dominant economic power in 2016. So the president we elect next November will be the last president of the United States to preside over the world's dominant economic power. That fact should shame every American, and it should shame them into demanding a candidate pledge to reverse that and restore American economic leadership in the world.
Yeah, but Mark, as we all know, here's the problem. Iowa holds such great political sway over us all, and we all know this. And then you have, by the time we filter through the candidates, look, is Perry saying anything different than what Paul Lenti said versus what Romney said? I mean, a lot of it starts to sound like recycled pablum, and we wanted to have a cold, hard, definite answer about here's what we need to do. I'm still just not hearing it.
Right, no, and I think that's why I want candidates who are pledged to abolish specific cabinet departments, to privatize specific agencies, to roll back thousands of regulations. I want candidates who move the conversation. I accept that we're not going to get 100% of everything the guy runs on, but that's why I think it's important that every single American understands his role in moving the conversation to where it needs to be. What happened between 2008 and 2010 was that the Republican Party was supposedly leadershipless and rudderless. And it did better from being leaderless and rudderless than it does when it's got a leader and a rudder. Because what happened is that millions of ordinary citizens succeeded in moving the center of political discourse. The only reason we're even talking about debt is because millions of ordinary Americans got steamed about the disgusting spendaholic nature of what was going on in Washington and at state and local level. And they won a great victory in 2010. And what we need to do is keep that going. Don't wait for the Messiah. Don't wait for the godlike creature from another planet. We tried that in 2008, and the godlike creature turned out to be a total bust. So instead, what's important is to keep moving the conversation so that the squishy, jelly-spined, poll-tested politician has to move to where you are. That's actually far more effective than waiting for the next Messiah to get off the bus.
Now, I am suffering through the second administration of Jimmy Carter incarnate, who has reappeared in all of his glory, and I'm looking at our obviously Hawaiian-born president saying there's nothing he can do to right this ship. So I'm going to pass this off to you. Is there anything, if Obama came out tomorrow and said, hey, I made a mistake, Obamacare, I'm going to pull that off the table, or I'm going to implement a fair tax. Is there anything he can do, or is this presidency so lost, we just got to stick it out for the next 18 months?
Well, I think he sounds pathetic. I mean, a man who has had no executive experience of anything. He wanted this job. So when he stands up there saying, everything would be great if it weren't for the Arab Spring and the Japanese earthquake. The idea that somehow the U.S. economy would be going gangbusters if the Libyan rebels hadn't taken Benghazi, or if Japan hadn't had an earthquake and, the entire recovery summer apparently slid into the crack when it opened up in Japan. He makes himself look pathetic. His policies made things worse. That's the only slogan you need to run against Obama. Obama, he made it worse. We don't. Obamacare is a sixth of the economy. He basically decided to take the equivalent of the French and British economies and nationalize them. Federal regulation alone is a tenth of the economy. In other words, that's the equivalent of the Indian economy. People say, well, India seems to be doing well. India's booming. India's economy is growing. We're taking the equivalent of India's economy and tossing it down the toilet in federal paperwork every single year. That's the choice that the men in Washington make. They didn't have to do Obamacare. No one has done $1 trillion stimulus anywhere else on the planet. Taking $1 trillion worth of dollar bills and tossing them in the Potomac and watching them float out to sea is unique to Washington. He didn't need to do that. So it's not difficult to figure out where the course correction should be.
Now, as we're looking at this, we're talking about course correction, but with the possible, and I'm saying possible exception of the Alien Sedition Acts in this country over a century ago, I can't think of a time when the government looked at its own citizens and said, you guys are terrorists, you don't know what you're talking about. I mean, the problem I'm seeing, Mark, is that if people do stand up, you've got a lot of people that are just waiting to shoot you down, and these include the people that you elected.
Yeah, and what I find interesting is not like just the ordinary people who happen to go along to a Tea Party rally, but I get an awful lot of mail from powerful businessmen, CEOs of big companies, who say they're very nervous about making a statement against Obama because the administration comes crashing down on powerful enemies and figures out a way to stick it to you. I mean, this is bizarre to me that you actually prominent people in a supposedly free society are nervous about expressing criticism of the government. It's not a healthy sign. But at the same time, when Obama made that speech trying to explain the downgrade, he stood up in front of the planet and he sounded like a whiny loser. He blamed it on the Tea Party. He's essentially saying, "Oh, I'm the president of the United States. I'm the leader of the free world. But Bud in the hardware store and Darlene in the hair salon are out to get me." He sounds pathetic when he does that. And don't worry about being called terrorist. Don't worry about any of that. In the end, he works for you, not the other way around. He's the citizen executive of a free-born people. You hire him. He's not George III. You're not his subject. He's your subject, in effect. He works for you. And if he's reduced to whining and complaining that people are saying mean things about him, that's because the job he's doing is lousy. But you employ him. He's not George III, and you shouldn't be confused on that point.
No, I love that rationale, and we keep hitting that here for our listening audience. Say, we buy these people; they don't buy us. We got to own them and retain that right of ownership. Mark, just as we wrap this up, I'm trying to get the sense of Obamacare made it, in my mind, about as worse as you can get. Is there a worse with the capital W that's lying in wait that I'm not seeing yet?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, my book has a whole big section on how government health care fundamentally changes the relationship between the citizen and the state and makes it very hard to go back. It cements dependency. It leads, I think, ultimately to what you've seen on the streets of London the last week. But when the United States does it, the order maker in the world since 1950, I think the next stage in a post-prosperity America, when America goes over the cliff, it drags down the entire global economy with it. We are in for very dark times unless we actually act and roll this stuff back in the next 2, 3, 4 years. A post-American world. Your lefty professor, any lefty professors listening to you, Frank, enjoying comfortable campus sinecures, they're not going to like the post-American world as much as they think. They've been preaching about it for 40 years. They're not going to like it when it shows up, and it's going to show up very fast unless we roll this stuff back.
Mark, I am so waiting for the Mayan apocalypse just come on and wipe us all out so we don't have to deal with this nonsense.
Well, it won't be that good. We're not going to have like a nice, quick, devastating, Charlton Heston around the corner and see the Statue of Liberty poking up out of the rubble. It's going to be miserable, but it's not going to be swift and catastrophic in that way.
Final question, Mark. I got to ask you again about the book After America, Get Ready for Armageddon. Now, people can buy this at fine bookstores everywhere. I understand that, but you have a unique idea at your website, basically, so people can order on your website, and you will personally autograph the copy. How do they do this?
Yeah, well, if you go to steynonline.com, you can get a personally autographed copy of the book, and you may actually get quicker service, too, because you say all fine bookstores. There are actually fewer of them than there were the last time my book came out, because Borders were so reluctant to stock my book, they went out of business rather than to carry it. So if your Main Street bookstore is no longer there, ordering it online is the thing to do.
Mark Steyn, thank you so much for taking the time. I appreciate it. I'm going to order a book. You're going to see my little checkbox or whatever filled in for an autograph. I'm going to do that this weekend, all right?
Okay, I'll look for it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time. Mark Steyn right there on the Morning Drive on News Talk 105.9 WVGA 846 on this Tuesday, August 16th. We got to take a time out. We'll be back with more to wrap up the whole shebang right here. News Talk 105.9. This is WVGA.